In 2018, I lived with my partner and my German Shepherd in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. I was 33 years old, and our apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up unit. Very typical low-budget Chicago rental in a, quote, changing neighborhood. The layout of our building is going to matter in this story. Our building had a total of 12 units. Mine and 3 below me had a shared front entrance, and the other 8 units were through a second entrance. All 12 apartments had connected back porches and stairs that shared a walkway to a rear gate, which led to an alley. From the front stairwell, there are windows on each landing to the back porches, so you can see the back door of my apartment when standing at the front door through that window. We had good relations with our neighbors, especially those that lived directly below us and shared our front door. These good relations were the thing that saved all 3 of us, my partner, my dog, and myself. My partner was in a touring band at the time, and would leave for weekends or weeks at a time, which was a scary thing for me because I was sexually assaulted and stalked by an ex in my teens and 20s. I always worried something would tip him off and he'd start stalking me again. A little less than a month before our 2-week tour my partner had scheduled, I received a creepy Facebook message from that stalker ex from yet another new account. About a week after that, my car was broken into. The glove box was emptied. Things were thrown around, but the only thing that was taken was a bag of dog treats. I had about $20 in change in the compartment between the seats, but they didn't take it. I was on high alert at that point, and very scared about the time I'd been alone during the tour. My partner was kind of irritated with me in the situation and felt that it was too last minute to cancel, especially over what amounted to a bad feeling and a few isolated things that weren't direct threats. And truthfully, car break-ins are very, very common in Chicago. It's happened to me like 15 times, and police usually do the reports over the phone and don't even come to the scene. What I found really strange was that the thief didn't take the money. I did notice there was a homeless man who had started camping on the boulevard nearby recently, but it was unlikely he did anything. My partner ended up leaving for his tour, and I set up cameras and bought door braces for my front and back doors. I became completely nocturnal, unable to sleep at night. My poor dog developed diarrhea, maybe because she was picking up on my stress level. It meant that I was taking her down all 4 flights of stairs for her to go blast her bowels 6 or 7 times a night. I had the distinct prickly crawling sensation of being watched when I would take her out, but I couldn't tell what was genuine and what was my own fear and paranoia. Her diarrhea lasted an unusually long time, like 3 or 4 days. I was going in and out the main door a lot, feeling very scared, and I noticed that some of my neighbors wouldn't pull the door all the way closed, so the lock engaged. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor one day, including that I was extra careful because of the stalker. He was supportive, said he'd mention it to the other neighbors if he saw them, and I noticed that the door was locked more frequently after that. My partner came home at about 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning. At about 8:30 a.m. that morning, my first-floor neighbor's place was burglarized. He was a metalhead dude who collected instruments, sold weed and psychedelics, and lived alone. He likely went out for breakfast and left his door unlocked while he was gone. Someone had come in, eaten the leftovers in his fridge, took a coat and a pair of boots, and left a filthy coat and a pair of boots, took his college diploma but left $500 in the same cabinet. They all left the expensive musical instruments and mixing equipment, left the drugs, but did take a set of keys. The keys were to the first-floor apartment, and a master key for front door and the back gate. My neighbors ran into each other right after the break-in, and the second-floor neighbor said to, "Go tell No Donut, because she has a stalker." So my metalhead neighbor came up to let me know what had happened. My partner had just gotten home from his tour when he knocked at the front door. I jumped out of my skin but looked through the peephole, recognized him, and the 3 of us stood on the stairs at my front door while he told us about the break-in. We jabber-jawed for a while, about 15 to 20 minutes. While we were talking, we heard the front door open and close below us, but thought nothing of it. Then, we saw a man climbing up my back porch and into my back door through the window. There was no other apartment he could have been going to, and he had to walk past all 11 more accessible units on his way to mine. He was not my stalker, and I didn't recognize him, but his image is burned in my mind. He was wearing flashy black and white high-top sneakers, not the ones stolen from downstairs. His black coat was oversized and hanging off his shoulders. We locked eyes through the window, and he froze halfway up the stairs to my back porch. He slowly took his cell phone and called someone as he slowly turned around halfway up the steps. He walked back down the stairs in an artificially slow motion kind of way, like he was pretending to be nonchalant, and then bolted into a sprint as soon as he hit the porch below mine. My neighbor ran downstairs and dialed 911. My partner and I ran through the apartment to the back porch and saw a sedan and a windowless van pull out from the sketchy building 2 doors down. Both cars floored it out of the alley. We didn't get the plates, but the cops said it wouldn't have mattered. There wasn't any crime committed and nothing concrete to justify stopping them. They very condescendingly explained this to me as they took my statement later. My neighbor is the one who actually made the call and has the police report. My partner and I were just considered witnesses. For a long time, the thing that scared me the most was the tool that my neighbor found when he went running downstairs. It was a 2x4 piece of wood, cut to about 2 feet, and about 6 inches of it had been made into a handle. It looked like a paddle, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was a ram for the door jamb/locks. When I looked at my door afterward, it looked like the frame had been repaired, like it had been broken open before. It seems like they used the one master key to place the ram, get somebody at the back door to catch me if I tried to run out that way, and somebody else was going to come back around, since they only had one key, and they'd break in my front door and go forward with whatever they had planned. When we caught them before they could catch me unaware, they seemed to have aborted the plan. I suspect they'd been watching me, especially while I was taking out my dog, and figured that I was alone. It was pure coincidence that my partner had gotten home 30 minutes before all this. I feel that we all could have been horribly injured or worse had we been trapped inside and they had gotten the jump on us. Nothing else ever came of it, except that my landlord refused to change the locks, but he did agree to let us out of our lease. I moved out of Chicago and now have added a younger dog. I'm training him to do some bite work. My current house is surrounded by cameras and floodlights, as well as wingnut neighbors. So whoever was on my back porch and whatever they had planned, let's not meet. I'm not certain that this story belongs on this sub, but as it involves a story that does involve a level of stalking, I figure I would post it here. To gain a proper context of this story, I should explain some things about the town I grew up in. I lived, and still live, in one of the wealthier counties in the United States. You have towns that fall in the low middle class bracket, with the majority being middle to upper to middle class. I lived in one of these towns. At the time of this story, 1995 through 1996, the majority of this town was Caucasian with a few Hispanic and Asian families. Seeing as I am a minority, I was used to being teased and or bullied due to the color of my skin. As it was a suburban neighborhood, it never went beyond racial slurs/light bullying though. Now on to the story. The town has 5 schools, not including the Catholic school. There are 2 that cater to the pre-K to 5th grade crowd, while 2 others that go from pre-K to 8th grade, one of each type on the north and south side of town, with a high school that takes in children from the north and south sides respectively. I was attending the pre-K to 5th on the north side at the time. I had never heard much about a particular teacher until it was getting close to when I was entering the 5th grade, but apparently everyone wanted to be in his class. His name was John. He had been teaching at the school for a number of years. His family participated in many town events, and he was the coach for the high school baseball and softball teams for a number of years after this incident occurred. Parents loved him so much that they would push for their child to attend his class. It did not work that way though. You were assigned to a teacher by alphabetical order, not by preference. For the first month or so, I could see why everyone loved him. He taught in a way that was quirky but practical. He liked the children to engage in their studies rather than feel the need to cram it in before dismissing it. He had a passion for every lesson he taught. Keep in mind that for primary school, the teacher would cover all topics from mathematics to history to English. He loved to joke around and get his students laughing whenever possible. That's what led to the beginning of when things began to go sour. One day he had told a particularly funny anecdote. Everyone in the class began laughing. One by one, the kids began to quiet down until one student, AJ, was the only one laughing. To this day, I do not know the motivation behind it, but when AJ could not calm himself down, John walked behind him and in a swift moment, grabbed the back of his head, slammed it twice against his desk before pulling it back up. AJ sort of toppled over and fell to the ground. Everyone in the classroom was silent. John then began to semi-kick/sweep AJ out of the classroom until he was in the hallway. And then, as though nothing had happened, he continued going on with his lesson. The next day, AJ was absent. We had a substitute teacher, and all of the students were being called down to the principal's office. When I was called, the principal was there along with a police officer, who I recognized from the DARE program, and a man and a woman in suits. I later concluded that it was CPS. They wanted to know what had happened yesterday in class. I told them what I had seen, and I was sent back up to class. 2 days later, AJ was still absent, but John was back to teaching. I need to really stress that John and his family were very connected and well-liked throughout the town. I say this because though this happened almost 20 years ago, I cannot understand how 1, he was allowed to keep his job, and 2, he knew that I had told the truth. From then on out, the abuse began lightly. The first thing John would do is begin volunteering me to answer any and all questions he had while teaching. It made no difference if other children raised their hands when he asked a question. He would always call on me. I was always shy and never liked to stand out in the crowd, and the more he did this, the more I became nervous, as whenever I didn't know the answer, he would chuckle and say things like, "Of course you don't," or "I don't expect much from you." After a few weeks, I began receiving detention for others misbehaving. If kids were caught talking or passing notes, it was my fault even if I was sitting across the room. The first thing he did, since, quote, I was obviously such a troublemaker, was pick up my desk, which back in the day had the chair attached to it, along with me in it, and move me to the back of the room near the closets. As I was adopted, it was well known in my town as I had made a speech in 4th grade about how I was adopted but proud to be an American. The next step was having me face the wall, as, quote, only true Americans should be allowed to learn. One particular incident that I will never forget is when a classmate had made a paper plane and thrown it across the room. I had detention that afternoon, and I'll note that I had detention almost every afternoon for the rest of the year. When everyone else left, his assignment for me was to write a 500-word essay on the history of aviation. Keep in mind, I had no books. We were not learning this in social studies, and I was 10 years old. I was sitting in the classroom until 4:30 when I finally stood up. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, standing up to match my movements. "I'm leaving. I can't do this, and my mom is waiting for me outside." I lived 6 blocks from school, but I was hoping he would think that I had a concerned parent outside, so he would let me leave. When I saw that he didn't believe that, I dashed for the door without my books or backpack and bolted down the stairs until I hit the first floor. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it was cut short as I heard the 2nd floor stairway door slam open and his footsteps rushing down the stairs. I bolted out of the back doors and did not stop running until I was down the block from my house. At the time, both of my parents were working. My mom would normally get home at 3 or 4, whereas my dad was working until 6 to 9 at night. My mom initially thought that I was saying these things about my teacher because I wanted attention, but when it started to become common for me to come home and crawl into a fetal position as I cried for a couple of hours, she began doing some investigating. Before I knew it, my mom was at the school after hours almost every day fighting for justice or to have me placed in another classroom. Much later in my life, I heard that my mom had a meeting with the principal and John. She explained what I told her had been happening. John's response to her was, "I don't really see what I'm doing wrong here," with a smug grin on his face. The principal believed me and my mom and was willing to fight for me. This is why I mentioned that John and his family had leverage in town. The day the principal promised us that he would begin investigating into the matter, the Board of Education made him an offer. In exchange for dropping any investigation, they would promote him to superintendent. Immediately, he was gone, and we had a substitute principal, who I also had later as a substitute teacher in the 7th grade. I would think that he was told that he was there until a replacement principal could be found. No investigations were ever launched, and any further complaints to the temporary principal were met with, "My hands are tied and there's nothing we can do." This story can continue for a while, but I'll focus on what happened as a form of retaliation for getting my mother involved. One day right before recess, John told my classmates, while I was in the room, that I was not a true American, and people like me needed to learn my place. He suggested that they do what they felt they should do to make me feel welcome on the playground, and to spread the word to the kids in the other class. The first day I went outside to play for lunch, I had 2 kids double-team me. If I even tried to take a swing, another kid who was standing around would push me so that I would lose my balance. Since John had taken the volunteer role of watching over the kids during recess and lunchtime, no one came to my aid. For the rest of the school year, I was eating my lunch and spending my recess/lunch periods inside the stairway with my niece and a few of the special education kids to keep me company. By the end of the school year, I had gotten used to sitting outside of the classroom for portions of the class. My troublemaking was bad enough where sitting in the back turned away from everyone else wasn't effective anymore. Detentions were common, and my mother was in the office almost every day. What I was afraid of most was that everyone from my class would be transferred over to the northern pre-K to 8th grade school, and since most of them had taken to beating me up on and off the playground, I feared that this would continue. I do not know what had to be done, but I was ordered to seek child psychology, and there was an exception granted so that I could go to the counterpart school on the southern side of town. I have relayed this story, and I know that it sounds far-fetched or completely made up. After all, how could someone get away with all of this without any repercussions? To be honest, I do not have all of the answers. I discovered later that besides AJ, whose parents began at-home teaching from then on out, I was the only one who had told the truth about what had happened. Later on, kids admitted that their parents had told them a lie if they were asked about what took place. When you have a teacher with tenure and a solid track record who is a pillar in the local community and donates money and resources to the town versus the word of 2 10-year-olds, it just wasn't enough to hold it against him. I spoke to the old principal when I hit adulthood about the entire ordeal, and he admitted that John had connections with the police and CPS. This was how he found out that I had said something. And, though he hated to admit it, the principal had been bribed to keep his mouth shut and move on. I told him that I held nothing against him and still speak to him on rare occasions. I can say that John was a defining person in my life. He changed how I saw the world, people, and the issues caused from that ordeal left me with issues that I still deal with today. Even when I was 17, I would still have people who would throw food, drinks, and once a rock at me because it was what they had been told to do by a teacher 7 years later. All I could do was make sure that my nieces and nephews never had to deal with him, and try to move on as best as I could. The last I heard, he still coaches baseball and softball and still teaches. He still lives in the same house he lived in when I had him as a teacher. I have seen him around town, but I have never once spoke to him since 5th grade. The one time where we were close enough to each other for him to actually recognize me, it didn't seem like he remembered who I was. So, that's the story of the worst bully I've ever had. Not from the hands of a student, but a teacher.